this is important for me because a big part of my work has also been kind of like exploring the darker side of psychedelics, or what happens when psychedelics are, whether maliciously or non-intentionally, responsible to some extent for people buying into belief systems that aren't necessarily good for them nor for society, which is something that tends to happen quite a lot. I mean, I think in the last few years we have seen also kind of like the pendulum swing out to the other side, where a lot of people, in the psychedelic community or spiritual communities have gravitated towards ideologies that weren't necessarily what you would expect from people that are trying to find enlightenment or to be better people or better social subjects. I think like a big part of the work for people in these communities is also kind of like trying to find those frameworks where people can remain skeptical and critical and develop a lot of really strong critical thinking faculties to be able to contemplate all of the things that are opened up in these states, without necessarily allowing that to also radicalize us in a different direction. Yeah, like it's the one thing that I see a lot, for example, with plant medicine people. Right, like people go and drink ayahuasca many times, and then they start buying into kind of like this new agey animistic worldview that is presented to them through the centers that they attend or through the facilitators that serve the medicine. And then there's oftentimes also sorts of like spiritual belief systems attached to that worldview. And once you buy into one, then everything else kind of like just comes rolling in. And and then people just end up with these really weird mixtures of commercialized animism and caricature-like ontologies, and then also some sort of like really weird proto-anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And it's just, like this is something that is very important just to keep track of. So when, particularly people that are offering or working with psychedelics, that we're offering frameworks of interpretation and meaning making that don't necessarily are steering people towards something else. Yeah, but we're just like really offering kind of like a more neutral way of precisely that, like having our own reckoning with our own ideologies and seeing what our own belief systems are like, and then having that capacity to be critical and skeptical about the things that we think.
Yeah, I think this is one of the reasons that I really wanted to connect with you and speak about. And I ran across your site called Healing from Healing.
Right.
I think a lot of what you're speaking about is embedded in this project that you're doing. And I've had, a similar I think I had a similar experience with psychedelics. And I think, it kind of the thing with psychedelics, it really expands your mind. It blows everything open. And now it's like everything is a possibility. And it makes you very susceptible for picking things up. And I think this is the good thing about it, but it is also the potentially dangerous thing about it, is that in these environments, when you're using these things, it's very easy for beliefs to get planted into your mind. It's very easy for other people's views to kind of sneak their way into your mind.
Yeah.
And that's what happens a lot of times. People use these plants and these medicines and in various environments, and then they just pick up what's around. And it's a very it's a very sensitive time for your mind. It's a very sensitive time for your meaning making system.
Yes.
And yeah, it's like I see the same thing. I think I've seen the same patterns and the same kind of similar pathologies. And it's interesting because a lot of what you said, it was like, seeing that the dominant worldview is like this very left brain kind of driven, like we're going to achieve things, we're going to try to control nature, everything's hyper individualistic. And like you're speaking out against that. And that's, I think a lot of people come to that realization through their psychedelic experiences. And then it's like, well, let's throw the intellect out. Let's throw the critical thinking out. Let's throw skepticism out. Let's throw science out. Let's throw all that away.
Yeah.
That's the evil white man. That's the evil, you know what I'm saying? The colonialism and all of that. And it's like, then you're coming and you're saying, no, hold on. we need to see that there's pathologies here, but we also need to integrate that and put these worlds together somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do feel that many times people do throw the baby with the bathwater, in kind of like rejecting all the, and this goes for everything. religions we grow up with, spiritual systems we grow up with, the scientific model as a whole. I mean, the amount of people that I met in the rainforest that, are disdainful of book learning, for example, like, oh, like that's just intellectual learning, that serves nothing unless you're experientially learning. That's kind of like a very widespread belief amongst like plant medicine spiritual people, right? Like, oh, like the only kind of learning is what spirit puts you through. Like there's nothing you can learn in books, so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, again, like I think this is obviously the key to many things when it comes to integration, is also like being able to integrate epistemologies and ontologies and ways of looking at the world, and let's say like the best that each system has to offer, and the good things that the good things that different people come with. I don't think there's one particular way of looking at the world that is better than others. I think they all depend exactly on the environments that we grow up in. Obviously, like a person that grows in the rainforest all of their lives, from age 0, and they have a very different capacity for perception. I mean, this goes really back to the basic building blocks of cognition, right? Like the perception of things changes. This is something that we've demonstrated time and time again in Western psychology when it comes to understanding perception, right? Like the environments that we are exposed to in our early years determine in many ways the kind of shapes that we perceive, the kind of sounds that we're able to hear, the kind of interactions between objects that come to mind, right? Like there's kind of like this classic contrast amongst like, oh, like, well, Western people are always going to pick out individuals from a picture, whereas Oriental people are always going to focus on the context, right? Like the background, like they're more likely to perceive kind of like right brain ideas of the whole versus left brain individual components of the picture. So, I think these differences in perception and then in cognition create different worldviews. Obviously, they create different ontologies. They create different ways of understanding, interacting, meaning making, and sense making the environment that we're part of. So again, like people like me, or people like you, like Western people that grew up for 35, 40 years in Western or Westernized countries, they go to the rainforest and they drink ayahuasca. And then they hear from their facilitators, or they hear from the owners of the retreat center, or sometimes kind of like half-assed translations of whatever the actual indigenous healers are saying. And they're like, oh, of course, like I'm not depressed. I have a spirit attached in my mind. I have a blood-sucking entity that is draining me from my energy because this is a worldview of the rainforest. And Mother Ayahuasca told me that, and the person, instead of having kind of like the weight of a psychiatric diagnosis that needs to be medicated, goes back home and now has the weight of like a blood-sucking entity that is draining their life force. And I mean, what is better, really? Like what kind of story would you like to carry better? I mean, okay, this is kind of like an exaggeration, but these are things that happen. I mean, I've seen that happen. So this is kind of like one example that I oftentimes give, right? Like when we're trying to change a story based on a cultural or ontological building block, it's important also that we're not installing another one that makes even less sense to that person. I mean, what are you going to do? Are you going to go to, who are you going to go in New York or in Los Angeles or in London now that you believe that what you have is that you have a blood-sucking entity draining your life force? I mean, the psychiatrist is not going to help you. It's going to make things worse. So I mean, these are complicated things when it comes really to like the ideologies that prime these kinds of interpretations in things. But on the other hand, right, like there's a lot of value in getting like a good, solid, let's say neutral overview of what is an Amazonian ontology, for example. How do people in the rainforest actually experience their relationality, the way of getting sick or being ill or healing, what it means really to grow up experiencing the world in an animistic manner, where the world is not a collection of objects to be exploited for human gain, but a community of subjects with which you interact horizontally. The importance of reciprocity and mutual responsibility towards everything that is sentient. And, sentience in the rainforest includes everything. There's people, there's birds, there's trees, there's plants, there's rocks, rivers, like everything is an equal, or everything is an equal. So, when people grow up with that kind of story, right? Like, well, everything in my environment is my equal. I'm not superior to anything. The birds and the jaguars and the rocks and the rivers, they're all people. There's human people and there's also non-human people, but we all share the same basic building blocks of what it means to be human. Sentience, intelligence, agency, intentionality, the capacity to feel and hold grudges and get mad and feel sad and feel joyful. That primes people to interact with their environment in a very different way, in a much more fearful and respectful way that gives them already a good head start in, let's say, trying to, or managing harmoniously and balanced ways their interactions with their environment. Whereas if you grow up in a culture that is based on consumerism and exploitation of resources indiscriminately, and where the ideology is that the wealthier, richer, the more that you hoard resources from others, the more respect that you get, and the more that people look. I mean, this is the kind of idea, for example, in Amazonian societies would be looked down as pathology.